going to be moving through planning for success using bookends, or what is written, your standards, content and grade level standards, and what is tested or assessed. How are those standards going to be assessed at the end of the unit, the end of the year? And thinking from these two goalposts, what we do in the middle as educators, our lesson design, our creativity, our own dose of magic or the sprinkles that we throw on top, our guiding questions, our strong teacher moves can be more meaningful if they are anchored between these two bookends, what is written, the standards, and how they will be assessed. We've all heard this quote before. At least you have if you've been in education very long. It's a Paul Bambrick Centolla quote. Effective instruction is not about whether we taught it, so those standards, but it's about whether the students mastered it, learned it. When they assessed, they were successful. Here's a comic strip that often we see when we're talking about data. Let's talk about Stripe and let's relate his whistling lesson to our teaching of the standards. I taught Stripe how to whistle. I don't hear him whistling. I said I taught him. I didn't say he learned it. Now let's correlate that with our bookends. What is written and what is tested. What is written in our standards, and then that other bookend of what is tested ensures that we're staying aligned and that we're monitoring student progress. We're not just teaching the standards and stepping away from instruction, offloading that accountability to students, saying, I taught it. Now what you do with it is on you. Mm-mm. We're teaching the standards. We're ensuring that our considerations instructionally are aligned to those standards, and then we're assessing to ensure that our students have mastered those standards. So at this point, I want you to be mindful of the quote from Paul Bambrick Centolla. It's not about whether we taught it, it's about whether students have learned it. And then I want you to be mindful of Stripe and his whistling lesson as we dive into what is written. Planning for success using the bookends is essential that we are mindful of our specific content or grade level standards. Without the standards, districts and schools don't have goals to shoot for. By matching what is taught in the classroom to the standards in each subject area, students and their parents and teachers will know what teachers should be teaching and what students should be learning and what they will be tested on. The standards create for us a goalpost of knowing what is essential or critical within that grade level or within that content area. They give us our starting point. What is written? Again, I'm going to say it. It's the standard. That's the component of what is written. Curriculum standards or content standards. In Texas, the TEKS describe what students should know and be able to do at the end of each grade or course. Student expectations drill down just a bit and identify the specific knowledge and skills that students must demonstrate. Let's stop for a moment and let's really think deeply about content standards and their purpose. Content standards describe the knowledge and skills students should attain. They also are the what students should know and be able to do. Content standards determine the level of rigor that should be seen throughout the instructional delivery. And content standards can be used to determine the quality of curriculum and the lesson plan to ensure alignment. Misty, what does that mean? I want you to think about if and when you have or will be appraised, or someone is in your room to observe your lesson. first point of reference should be, what is the content standard for the day? Because every other consideration is anchored right back to that first bookend. What is written? In essence, the content standard presents for the person visiting that classroom a system of checks and balances or an audit. An audit of, is everything I'm witnessing aligned back to that content standard? It's the starting point. It drives every other consideration throughout that lesson. Content standards, such as Common Core State Standards, describe what students are to be taught over the course of a year. Now we've done a quick drive-by of what is written. Content standards. Now let's jump into what is tested. In data-driven instruction, the rigor of the actual assessment item drives the rigor of materials taught in class. Misty, what does that mean? Every consideration that you make as an educator prior to delivering instruction should be anchored to these two big bookends, what is written, but also what is tested. This is one of the largest missteps in the PLC process or in the planning phase. When we think about the questions that we ask during a lesson, when we think about the student activities that are provided for our scholars during the lesson. When we think about the collaborative opportunities and the questions that we're asking, are they at the level of rigor required for students to be successful on the assessed item? You know how you would know for certain? If you ensured that you allowed that end goal, the assessed item, what's going to be tested, how that content standard is going to be tested to drive every consideration in between. If you are planning in that way, with yes, you're aligning everything back to that content standard and what is written, but you're also ensuring that you're allowing how it's going to be tested, how it's going to be assessed to truly drive every instructional consideration, then you're living in the magical area of true alignment and where you will see increased student performance. I want to make certain that we've become very knowledgeable about what is meant by what is tested. Simply, what is assessed or how that standard is assessed. There are two main ways that we assess student mastery in education. We either assess that through formative assessments or through summative assessments. Big difference, formative assessments are going to be smaller chunks of assessments, maybe 1 to 5 questions, depending upon where you are in the unit or the lesson. So for a demonstration of learning, an exit ticket, a check for understanding, you might have anywhere between 1 and 3 assessment items. When you're thinking about those summative assessments, you're thinking about those large district designed assessments or state designed end of year assessments. Focusing still on the endpoint and the goal. Content standards such as the Common Core or state standards describe what students are to be taught over the course of the school year. Now, you saw that early on when we were talking about the bookend of what is written. But now, as we're moving toward the closing of now discussing what has been tested, a learning objective is a statement that describes what students will be able to do at the end of the lesson as a result of the instruction. I want us to have a full stop right here. I know we've not covered learning objectives, but what we have done is we've talked about content standards. We've talked about the need for alignment between your content standards and how that standard is assessed and everything that happens in between. A key indicator before you can ever move to your demonstration of learning or that formative assessment, that check for understanding, that exit ticket, you have to ensure that your learning objective and that statement specifically describes how students will be able to display mastery at the end or as a result of the instruction. If you start there with your lesson design, I promise you, you will begin to see increased student achievement. Guiding questions for you. How has the standard been assessed previously by the state? So when you're thinking about the bookend of tested, That's crucial. If you were in a state tested grade level, every time you move to lesson design, very quickly just reference how the state has previously assessed this particular skill. How will the standard be assessed on locally designed assessments at the end of the unit? You want to be mindful that you're presenting information in a way where students can think about that information differently. So if your district designs unit assessments, be mindful of how they're going to assess that same skill. Why? Because if your students are successful on those particular unit assessments, and you know that there's a firm alignment to state assessments, you have two ways of planning. You can plan from referencing how it will be assessed on your district designed unit assessment and how it has been assessed in the past by your state. You should also be thinking, should the standard be assessed in full specificity at this time in the year? Misty, what does that mean? During the beginning markers of the year, you might not be teaching every standard to full specificity. Dive into your district adopted curriculum to identify what part of the standard is supposed to be included at this point in the year. A lot of times teachers will pull out their YAG or their year at a glance or their scope and sequence, and they will see a specific standard. And instead of going deeper into the curriculum documents to identify what part of that standard is to be taught, they immediately begin to plan to full specificity. Now, I'm going to say more times than not, yes, that's the realm of where you're living. You're living in full specificity. But there are times in the year that you're staying within a realm of chunking that particular standard. So simply be mindful of, is it going to be taught to full specificity during this lesson and this unit? Or am I only supposed to, or ensure the students are accountable for a portion of that standard at this point in the year? These three questions are your guide to how the student should be assessed at the end of your lesson, or how to design your check for understanding. Key to success: know where you're going and which route you're going to take. If we want to achieve increased student outcomes, instruction and assessments must be rigorous and aligned to end of year mastery. Know your route. And be mindful of Stripe. I taught Stripe how to whistle. I don't hear him whistling. I said I taught him. I didn't say he learned it. Don't let one of your students fall prey to the narrative of Stripe. Ensure that you are truly being mindful of what is written, your standards, and how those standards will be assessed. There is some autonomy when it comes to creating those learning objectives, or even creating, completing those teacher exemplars. And where every educator loves to live, putting your own spin on your instructional design or curating those aligned student activities. Ensure that you are planning from the perspective of the two bookends: what is written, your content standards, and how those standards will be assessed. What you do in the middle is where your creativity truly comes to life. Continue being intentional in your planning practices, and we will move the needle of student achievement toward excellence. For more information and resources, please visit www.ileadconsulting.net. I would love to connect with you. You can find me on Twitter at Misty Green iLead. Until next time, let's turn our learning into action.